So you think you might like to get paid to be a writer? It's creative. Sounds like it could be fun. You can sit at a desk or on the beach or anywhere and get paid to put words on paper. Today our guest is Phil Elmore, and he's going to share with us the life of a working writer. Phil is a best-selling commercially published author, technical writer, internet marketing copywriter, and content creator living and working in upstate New York. He's written hundreds of books, including 24 action novels in the Gold Eagle Worldwide Library series, The Executioner, for Harlequin. His best-selling nonfiction book is 10 Things Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Your CPAP Machine. He has contributed countless articles to various firearms, knives, and martial arts publications. You can visit Phil online if you want and hire him to write for you at www.philelmore.com. Hi, this is Bob Poole. Welcome to the Water Cooler Hangout. For over 40 years, I've been helping people like you grow and prosper. Please join me and guests like Seth Godin, Guy Kawasaki, Lauren Cordain, Beverly and Tim Walden, Phil Elmore, and more as we share real-life stories about sales, marketing, leadership, creativity, and current events. Need help in moving to the next level? Find out how others have done it by listening to the Water Cooler Hangout. Hey, good morning, Phil, and welcome to the Water Cooler Hangout.
Good morning.
It's good to have you here.
That's good to be here.
I've read somewhere where you refer to yourself as a working writer. Can you tell us what that means to you? How does that differ?
Yes, I make a distinction between being an author and being a working writer. Literally anyone these days can become an author. That's not an insult. It's not a criticism. The first book I ever published was a self-published book. I will say as an aside that you only ever get one first novel, and they're all terrible. You must exorcise the poison. There's no getting around it. Very few authors turn out a brilliant book the first time out. Maybe J.K. Rowling is right. The exception. But even published authors who do great and have wonderful careers. There's an author named, I think he's an Australian, named Matthew Reilly, who's written a series of adventure books. And he published his first novel after rewriting it after he had several commercial successes, and says in the introduction that, that when he self-published it, it didn't sell many copies and it wasn't very good. And that's because you simply don't know what you don't know. And most beginning writers don't write well. And I'm no exception to that. So because we live in an era of self-publishing and there are no barriers to putting out a novel, anyone can put out a novel and become an author. And many of us who grew up enamored of the idea of being authors, it has a mystique associated with it. That's understandable. There's so many people who will write a book and be like, I wrote a book, and maybe they'll write several. And if they're just writing for an audience of friends and family and they're not subjecting themselves to a high level of harsh criticism, they're not going to improve. So those people are all authors. A working writer, by contrast, is somebody who is actually making money at the trade of writing. And unlike being an author, being a working writer has no glamour associated with it. It has no cachet. You're literally making a living off the sweat of your brain, and sometimes it's quite undignified. I have had to write, I cannot tell you, and I won't tell you some of the things I've had to write to make a living. I have contributed hundreds of thousands of words of just debris to the internet, working for internet marketers. That's one of the big categories of available work, if you are a working writer, is internet marketing and people who write websites and who need web copy or blog posts or various things along those lines. So when you get into the realm of content creation, which is an umbrella term for I write things for people when they tell me what they want, that can be anything from white papers to articles to even ebooks for clients who want to offer ebook products, physical books even. I have written countless books for clients. I have written novels for clients. I have rewritten novels for clients. There's very, very few genres of writing I have not done for pay. But the exchange for that is, in many cases, a working writer, you don't get credit for what you're doing. That's the gig. You get paid a flat fee, and then the person does whatever they will do with what you produce for them and takes credit for it. Or you write material that isn't a book and isn't particularly glamorous, might be a website, might be a series of blog posts, could be almost anything. And that too is not something you'll take credit for, nor will you want to in some cases. You will pound the pavement and stand on virtual street corners. Used to be sites like Elance, which got bought by Upwork. I've done work on those sites. I've met clients on sites like Elance that became years-long clients who produced thousands and thousands of dollars of work for me. But doing that type of work is exactly like prostitution without all the dignity. You have to be willing to swallow your pride, get paid less than you think you're worth, do work that you might find a little detestable. Write about topics that you find, well, let's just say that you can't afford to find things offensive when you're trying to make a living that way. So when a client pays you to write a series of sleazy websites for products that you didn't even know existed until you did eye-opening research on them, then that's the gig. I had a client who had me do a series of websites like that for all kinds of adult products, we'll call them. And then one day he's like, yeah, I need you to give me 10,000 words on costumes. And I'm like, oh, what manner of vile thing? He's like, no, man, costumes, Batman, Superman. I'm like, what? It doesn't have disgusting sex stuff in it? How can I write that now? So, it really, there are some writers who would look at that and go, oh no, I'm destroying my writing talent, writing things that are beneath me, and it's going to harm my writing abilities. I don't see it that way. A working writer has to be able to compartmentalize the different categories of writing that they do. So you don't, you're just learning different genres and you learn to separate them. And overall, I would say that all that experience is beneficial because the more you learn to write, the better you become. It is helpful, like if you spend, week after grinding week writing web copy for websites on topics that don't personally interest you, which is part of the gig, then it's helpful to write on the side, work on your pet novel or work on something else that you find intellectually stimulating just to keep your hand in. But, in all your copious amounts of free time, I often say that you're not a working writer until you want to go to bed, but you can't because you have to finish what you're writing. And a lot of authors live a life of luxury where they never have to confront that. Oh, I don't feel like writing today, so I'm not going to. Oh, I wrote an entire chapter today, and aren't I proud of myself? And that's nice, but only when you've been up until 3 a.m. because you could grind out 10,000 words of web copy because you were under deadline, are you truly a working writer? I'm not saying that you should be proud of that. I'm just saying that that's what the job can be like. It can be very difficult, but the opposite part of that, the other side of the coin, is that it can be very fulfilling. It also gives you the ability to make money all the time. Like I can always make extra money if I'm willing to exchange sleep for it. The hard part is just finding a client willing to pay you. So that's sorry, you pressed the button that is talk about writing, and I just
no, that's a great description of what you call a working writer. But how many books have you written? Have you kept track?
I have the luxury of not being able to remember how many books I've written. I wrote 24 books for Harlequin alone, the romance novel company. They had a men's adventure imprint that they didn't like to admit to having for the longest time. And over several years, I wrote 24 books in their Executioner adventure series. If you've heard of The Punisher, you've heard of a similar property. The comic book The Punisher was, I think, widely acknowledged to be sort of inspired by or ripped off from The Executioner. They're stories about a man whose family is killed by criminals who makes the entirely logical decision to kill all the criminals. So he does over the course of, in the case of The Executioner, hundreds of books. Those have been ghostwritten by a staff of writers of whom I am only one of I don't know, dozens of people probably. I've never known exactly how many authors worked on that series, but when the original author wrote like 40 of the books and then sold the property to Gold Eagle, which was the imprint of Harlequin that put those out, then people like me wrote those books to the tune of, I think they were churning them out like 4 every few months for a while. So there are 600 or 700 books in that series at this point if you add them all together. I've ghostwritten books for other clients. I've written a number of science fiction novels for an IT company. I've done ghostwritten fiction for other people. I've edited and heavily rewritten books for clients. So those aren't. I wouldn't say that I wrote those books, but I definitely co-wrote them by the time they were done. And then I have nonfiction books that I've written years ago. I wrote a couple of martial arts books for Paladin Press before they went out of business years later. And my best-selling book, Because Life is Not Without a Sense of Irony, is a book about CPAP machines. Because, yes, as a starry-eyed youth, I thought I was going to get famous writing books about martial arts and how to beat people up and use weapons. And no, I'm a best-selling author because I wrote a book on machines that stop you from dying in your sleep.
Now, how did that come about?
Well, I actually went on an adventure where that's concerned. I got really sick, and then I had pneumonia, and then I had bronchitis, and then I went to my doctor and said, "Hey, when I go up a flight of stairs, I feel like I'm going to die, and I feel like it's worse than just being overweight." And he's like, "Well, it could be your heart." And I said, "What?" So they did a bunch of tests and determined that I had untreated sleep apnea that had probably damaged my heart. I did a sleep study. They gave me a CPAP machine. And adjusting to the CPAP machine turned out to be extremely difficult at first. I finally did make the adjustment, and the machine saved my life, and I'm much better today. And I have to do more testing yet, but they think maybe my heart has improved as well. It's hard to say without doing some
that's good.
very elaborate tests. But the first thing is it was put me on medication to make it easier for my heart to beat. And I sat down at my desk one morning, and I thought to myself, what's different? Oh, I don't hate everyone. Because it turns out that when your heart is trying to compensate for the fact that it's not pushing enough blood, it's hammering away at about 110 beats per minute at rest, and it makes you extremely irritable, among other things. So I thought to myself, there are all these things I wish I had known when I started this, things that would have made making the adjustment to the CPAP machine easier, because the hard part was not, I now have this machine I have to, a mask with a hose that I have to wear when I sleep. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was feeling like I was never again going to get a decent night's sleep because I couldn't sleep with the mask on at first.
Right.
And I went about 3 days without sleeping at all, and you would be amazed how quickly you mentally unravel when you haven't slept in 3 days. I was just out of my mind. So I wrote the book after I made the adjustment, explaining what I'd gone through in the hopes that other people who had that same transition would find it as useful. And I was thinking in terms of, as I wrote it, I was thinking in terms of relatives who I knew probably had the same problem, and how would I convince them that they needed to take the problem seriously. And for whatever reason, the book, which is just a little 99-cent book on Amazon, it became a bestseller. It was in double digits in Amazon's self-help quick read category, and it sells really well to this day. I'm amazed that it continues to turn out a significant amount of work.
What's the title of the book, Phil?
It's called 10 Things Doctors Won't Tell You About Your CPAP Machine.
Okay, in case people that are listening and are having problems with CPAP machines.
It's a much more extensive problem than I ever imagined.
What else does a working writer do? Because I've seen on your website, I looked over, it looks like you also do some work in audio or video.
Well, I was blessed with a fairly decent speaking voice, so I've had the opportunity to do audio work. I've read books for the audio book versions. That can be very difficult because a long book it takes. You can always work faster. You can always write faster. You can't talk faster. So, as a matter of fact, when you're doing audio work, you have to go slower because you have to allow for making mistakes. And reading an audiobook means it's not your conversational speaking voice. You're speaking slower. For example, if you ever listen to Ben Shapiro talk, his normal speaking voice is very, very fast, almost too fast. If you listen to him read one of his audiobooks, it almost doesn't sound like him because he's reading much slower because you have to when you do an audiobook. So the process of doing audio is fun, and I do enjoy listening to the sound of my own voice. So that part has always been enjoyable. But when it's a long project, it can be very difficult. Audiobook recording and doing voiceovers, because most of the clients are not people who want entire books written. They're people who want voiceovers for videos and for little promos. I am the voice of a parking system somewhere in the Midwest somewhere. I get a bunch of phrases for this zone cannot be parked in right now. Your credit card is invalid, stuff like that. And it's always weird when every once in a while I'll stumble across like a YouTube video that I did voices for. I have an internet marketing friend who bought a book on internet marketing and called me and said, "You'll never guess whose voice is on this audiobook." So it was me reading the audiobook on internet marketing that another internet marketing client of mine purchased.
Oh, great story.
So, that's been fun. I do a little bit of video editing. I have a client who has a series of seminars every year about his products that would pay me to edit together his videos. Those are just little things that I picked up here and there to sort of pay the bills. I even have the ability to do transcription because as a writer and as a prolific writer, I type very quickly. So transcription is relatively easy to do. The problem is, again, you can't listen faster. Yes, you can turn up the speed on the audio, but often that makes it more difficult to make out what's being said. So doing transcription work can be just as frustrating as recording audio in that you are limited to basically real-time progress.
So let me ask you, what advice would you give to someone who may be listening right now and is thinking they'd like to maybe do a little side hustle, or maybe they're getting close to retiring and they're thinking they might like to do some writing and get paid for it?
Well,
what do you suggest? Where do they start?
The best way to start would be to sign up with a site like Upwork or maybe even Fiverr, offering editing or copywriting or something related to one of the many functions that they can do. The primary purpose of sites like Upwork is to connect people who want the work done with people who offer the work done. But even though you're not supposed to go outside of the system, invariably, if you end up doing good work for somebody, they'll find ways to get a hold of you outside of the framework of that freelance site. And using sites like that, like I said, I developed clients who I ended up providing work for many years, and to the tune of thousands of dollars. Networking is also extremely important. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you need to be on LinkedIn so that people can find you. Most people don't use LinkedIn socially, but they use it when they need work done. I just recently got a message from a former coworker of mine who said, "Hey, this guy's looking for a writer and he has a public post on LinkedIn about it. You should go over and comment." So I did, and we may very well end up arranging a call to talk about the work that he needs done. Networking is extremely important, but it's a lot like losing weight. You can't just say, "Okay, step one, lose 100 pounds." Like it's a slow process. You can't just, "Okay, today I will network with all the people I need to network with." You have to build those over time. And I have had the luxury of years in this business to meet people and meet clients and meet other people who sometimes refer work to me. So if you do good work and you maintain positive relationships with the people that you do work with, and you stay connected to them online through sites like LinkedIn, that helps with the networking process. But it takes time. So you should be prepared to start small. Start with, like I said, one of the freelance sites like Upwork. Do the jobs, fill out your profile, put up a nice portfolio of work when and if you have it, and then just be willing to. It takes some grinding. You have to work on it over time. It's not going to happen overnight, and you're not going to make a ton of money on it at first. I first started I created my very first website where I sort of hung out my shingle as a writer. Oh gosh, 20, 25 years ago. And, it took a lot of years for me to get comfortable calling it a side income. These days I make my entire living writing things, different things for people. I like to say that my life is a series of desks. When I'm not at this desk, I'm at a different desk somewhere else. And it's amazing the adventures you can have from behind a desk. I have written things that were financially successful. I have written things for clients that turned out to be best-selling products for them that made tons and tons of money. I have written things that offended people and made lifelong enemies. So there's certain types of journalism I don't do anymore. It can be very fulfilling and a very adventurous life from behind a desk at a keyboard.
Well, one of the questions I get from people who are trying to start out well, it used to be photography all the time. Yeah, I started as a professional photographer many, many years ago. And so people will ask me, I'd like to do photography and get paid for it. What do I charge? So the same thing I'm sure is true about people who want to write for a living, or at least write for money. How do you figure out what to charge on these sites that you're like Fiverr or?
Yeah, that can be very difficult. The person who specifies a price first usually loses. And especially in these freelance sites, you're up against people who are doing work from other nations like India and working very cheaply. Now, a lot of the time you get what you pay for, but the fact is, it's very easy to get undercut. What what I normally do when I'm not working within the framework of a freelance system, like in the freelance systems like Upwork, there's usually a rate that was probably specified by the client or a range. You can usually tell, what do I bid in order to be a price that I can live with, but under what other people are offering. So there's some calculation based on context that happens there. If I'm just talking to a client out in the real world, then I usually ask them, well, what's your budget for this project? What are you comfortable paying to have this done?
Mhm.
And usually, like clients who know what they're doing usually have an idea of what they're willing to pay, and then your decision is, can I operate within that framework? If you don't have that, if they're not willing to specify, well, then you've got to make a shot in the dark. So basically, you do the mental math of how many hours is this likely to take me, which can be a real guess. It's not always easy to know. And then what would my hourly rate likely be? Over time, the more you do this, of course, you'll develop sort of an arbitrary system of rates that is flexible. And, we all charge different amounts based on the clients. The clients that we like usually get that "I like you" discount. And then if it's a
Mhm.
project that seems like a real pain and you don't care if you don't get it, then you'll cite a higher price because you don't really want to do it. And sometimes they'll meet that. So you end up making the money and then you have to grin and bear it. But most of the time, my go-to is, what's your budget for this project? And then I determine, can I afford to do the work at that price? And by that, I don't mean, is it enough money to be worth my while? What I mean is, whenever you do work, you're spending time that cannot be spent on anything else. Every project has a time cost associated with it. So if I know that doing this project is going to take 20 hours out of my week, and that 20 hours is going to generate X dollars, I have to say to myself, can I afford to spend 20 hours to get that amount of money based on the amount of money that I need to make overall? So being a working writer involves a lot of hustling, a lot of calculations, a lot of constant looking for money. All of my clients know that I'm always in need of money. It's never not the case because it's all about cash flow. When your rent is due 3 days from now, it doesn't matter if you're going to get $5,000 for a project 10 days from now. That doesn't do you any good. So, you're constantly sort of on the prowl for ways to keep the cash flow coming in that will keep you afloat. It can be difficult, and I'm not trying to discourage anyone by describing it as difficult. This is just the reality of doing this job. Again, the upside is I have the ability to generate income simply sitting at a desk. I'm not working, in a coal mine somewhere. I'm not going out, running a cash register. I literally have the luxury of making money sitting at a desk. It's a wonderful way to be able to make money if you can do it.
Have you had to adjust how you work during this whole COVID-19 pandemic thing?
Not for the most part. I do some technical writing, and that often involves having to go on site to look at machines and take pictures of them and get information about them. And so the pandemic has made that more challenging. But the fact is, like I said, my life is a series of desks. So as long as the desk that I'm at allows me to operate the computer that I need to operate, it doesn't matter. So it has not changed my lifestyle a whole lot. If anything, it's actually made it easier because you don't have to budget as much time for not being in the office because where would you go? So overall, this is one of those professions that is sort of pandemic proof. However,
Mm-hmm.
the one downside to the pandemic is a lot of clients who were paying for work became unable to do so or didn't need to do so, or my income definitely contracted. over the course of the pandemic. It was not easy, and it's still not easy because, of course, we're still not back to normal. So those are just the things that you come to terms with.
One last question. What's one bit of advice you'd give to someone who may be listening and thinking, all right, I want to give this a try? What's the one thing you'd tell them to do first?
Well, again, as I said before, the first thing they need to do is sign up for one of those freelance sites, fill out their profile, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. But that's the mechanical advice for how to get started. Emotionally and mentally, as far as how to get started, the one thing that has been of most benefit to me in my career is the ability not to take criticism personally. If you're not improving as a writer, then you're not writing. You should always be able to look back on your past work and go, that is not as good as I can do now. It was as good as I was capable of doing at the time, but I have since improved. And the only way to improve as a writer is being willing to accept harsh criticism. I worked for an IP development company that was probably the single best writing workshop period of my life, in that the folks who ran that company were not shy about telling me when my work was not good enough or where they thought I could improve. And early in my career, the single fastest way to make me angry was to criticize my writing, because I felt that was unfair and that I was a good writer. Well, I was wrong. You have to be willing to accept criticism and not take it personally, and see it as an opportunity to do better and improve, rather than getting personally affronted or upset or feel that it's unfair. When you're writing nonfiction and people criticize your work, it's very easy to say, well, they just don't like my opinion, so they're making unfair criticism. When you write fiction and people criticize your work, it cuts much deeper, because now they're attacking you. Now they're attacking what you do and how you see how a story is written. And being able to learn to accept criticism on both of those fronts really helped me, and helped me to become a better writer. So it can batter your ego down. There are days when you just feel like, I'm just not good at this. And that self-doubt is normal. You have to be willing to fight back against that, do better, be better. So there are times when it's an emotional battle, not every day. But if you look up writers' quotes about writing, which I did one time when I was putting together a manual on how to write a novel, but I still haven't finished because it was a side project. When I looked up a bunch of famous quotes from writers to put on, the facing pages of the chapters, they were all unhappy. Writing does not make people happy. It is not a source of joy. And part of that might be this sort of masochistic desire to be, a martyr, and that writers tend to be a self-indulgent lot. If you leave us to our own devices, we will do things that are not in our best interest, which is why the writer is only as good as his or her editor. And you'll see a lot of, especially amateur writers, who blog about writing. And when they're writing about writing, they're not getting any writing done, ironically. So there are a lot of pitfalls emotionally and mentally. It requires a lot of mental strength. So the single piece of advice I would give anyone who wants to embark on this as a way to make money, or even just if they want to write a book, is that be willing to be told that this isn't that good, and then get better. It can be hard. It can be very difficult, but it is absolutely necessary for the process.